Hello artists, let's have a chat about the 8th generation iPad as well as the 1st generation Apple Pencil and say for artists whether it's any good and whether you should get this over some of the more expensive iPads. So in short, if you're on a budget, I do think that this iPad is going to do all the things that you want it to do, and for an artist, I don't think that there's really going to be much you're missing out when using this iPad as compared to some of the more expensive iPads out there. Because even though the iPad Air does definitely look prettier, in terms of what really matters, in terms of just getting drawings on the page, they are very similar in a lot of ways. So I won't bore you by going too in depth with the specs, but in terms of the display, the resolution actually isn't that much different from the iPad Air, and you're not really going to be missing out a lot if you do go with this iPad over the iPad Air. And I've actually heard somebody say that they like the bezels because it's a resting place for their hands. And the screen itself looks totally fine. The gap between the screen and the glass really isn't that noticeable, at least on the black one. And it's as fast and responsive as you'd expect, even though it isn't the laminated screen that's in the iPad Air. And even though it does have a home button, it still has all of the great gestures that have made their way to phones and tablets. And the fingerprint scanner in the home button works perfectly great, just as you would expect from Touch ID. And there are ways to get around the Apple Pencil issues, which I will talk about in a bit. In terms of drawing with the Apple Pencil though, it works just as you'd expect, pretty much perfectly. Procreate is also very responsive and has also been very stable in my usage, and that is even at times when I've had another window off to the side. It's been an absolute joy to use the iPad for drawing, and it's by far my favourite way of drawing. Obviously though, if there weren't any drawbacks with the iPad 8th generation, everyone would just go with it. But there are some differences and there are some disadvantages to it. So the first one obviously is the design. It is still using the older design with the big bezels at the bottom and the top. And the Apple Pencil doesn't attach to the side of it as it does with the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. And on top of that, this iPad does have a lightning port instead of the USB-C ports which the iPad Air and iPad Pro have, which means that you are going to have to use Apple's proprietary wires and you won't be able to use the USB-C wires which you use with a lot of devices probably now. And some of the internal specs are a bit different with the iPad 2. So in terms of the one that's going to probably affect you the most, the iPad 8th generation starts at 32GB of storage rather than the 64GB of storage which the iPad Air starts at. And the rest of the internals are slightly worse than the iPad Air. So inside of this there's 3GB of RAM as opposed to the 4GB of RAM that's in the iPad Air. If that doesn't really mean much to you, basically the difference that it's going to make to you is the fact that in Procreate you don't get to use as many layers. But otherwise, the slightly older hardware hasn't affected my usage with this iPad. It's still very snappy, very responsive, and it does all the things that I want it to do really well without any sort of hiccups. As for the Apple Pencil, you do have to get the 1st generation Apple Pencil with this iPad. It doesn't work with the 2nd generation Apple Pencil. And the disadvantages of the 1st generation Apple Pencil are that it doesn't attach magnetically, as I said before, and it doesn't have the double tap feature to switch between drawing and erasing. And you also have to physically plug it in to charge it. And it has a different texture too, but those are basically all of the differences. I personally got around some of these things through accessories. Firstly, there are a whole load of Apple Pencil compatible cases available through Amazon, of which I've got 2, and both of them have a slot for the Apple Pencil that it's really easy to get the Apple Pencil in and out of. For this particular one, it's right here, this little flap here that you put the Apple Pencil in. And for this one, you put it right at the bottom here, and then there's a little hole here that you can push it out of. Secondly, for charging, I got this from Amazon. It does charge the iPad very slowly, but I just have it as like a ritual where I take the iPad up to bed at night, plug it in, plug the Apple Pencil in, and it never runs out on me because of that. And it means that I don't have to awkwardly have the Apple Pencil sticking out of the iPad when I want to charge it. Even though it is kind of annoying that Apple only put 32GB of storage in the entry-level iPad, if you know that you're only going to be using it for things such as drawing or using Word on it or just web browsing on it and things like that, and you know that that is not going to be changing into the future and you are not going to need any extra storage to store anything, The 32GB iPad is one that you are probably going to take a while to fill up, so you could probably go with it. But as soon as you know that you're going to be putting games on this, you're going to be downloading videos on this, or any of the large files on it, or you think that you even might be doing it in the future, I would recommend bumping up to the 128GB version of the iPad. That version still is cheaper than the entry-level iPad Air, and it does just give you the peace of mind that if you want to put some of those things on this in the future, you will be able to do that without having to go and remove other things to do it. Also, I haven't personally had any issues with the layer limitations in Procreate. I usually draw at 2048 by 2048, which gives me around 60 layers, which is more than enough for me, even though I typically do use a lot of layers. So hopefully this will put your mind at ease if you were considering this iPad, but were a bit worried to go for it because you thought you might be missing something if you go with this one over the more expensive iPad Air. If you want to see a video about whether you should start off your drawing journey by getting an iPad or by drawing physically, you can click on the video over this way. And if you want to see more videos that have all to do with the creation of animation, be sure to subscribe with the button over here somewhere. But for now, stay safe, keep brightening up the world with your art, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.